There's the pass to Leitner. Puts it up. Yes!
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Cameron Chronicles. I'm your host, Ranjan Jindal, joined by my co-host, Caleb Dudley. Caleb, good morning. It's early, man.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad we're back here for another week.
Yeah, it's exciting time. Today is a very special episode because we have two of our beats joining us, three of our beats right now, though. We have Martin Heintzelman, our women's basketball beat, who joined us last week. He's back on the podcast. Martin, welcome back, man.
What up?
And we also have, for the first time, Abby DiSalvo, our men's basketball beat, and our future sports editor of the Chronicle. Abby, welcome to the Cameron Chronicles.
Hey, happy to be here.
So we'll start off with what's been a crazy weekend for Duke basketball. Both teams are going to be advancing to the Sweet 16. The women's team won both of their games at home this past weekend, defeating Lehigh and Oregon en route to a Sweet 16 battle with North Carolina and Birmingham. So we'll recap those two games and talk about that. The men's team also defeated Mount St. Mary's and Baylor over in Raleigh, and will be taking on Arizona in Newark. So a lot to talk about on both ends of the basketball spectrum here. But first, this podcast is brought to you by Duke Stores. Support your favorite Duke team. Duke Stores is home to the only collection of merchandise in the world that comes to you straight from Duke University. Go to shop.duke.edu for all of your Duke merch. So let's start on the women's side. Martin, I'll speak with you because I know you covered the second game there. But we'll start with Lehigh. It was a pretty, wild performance for Duke, defeating Lehigh, giving up the second fewest points in NCAA tournament history. It was let me pull up my score, 86-25 defeat for Duke. What impressed you about Duke there, and what takeaways did you have from that first round matchup?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to really have meaningful takeaways in these sort of first round games, especially on the women's side, just because the disparity between Power Five, big schools, and these sort of small and major schools out of central Pennsylvania. I guess eastern Pennsylvania, but like it's hard to really have anything big, just because the difference is so wide. I'll say Aluchi Okananawa had a really good game. She had 15 points. 60% from the field is pretty impressive. I just thought generally they shared the ball really well. They were efficient from the field. The big thing, the headline, is the defense. I mean, it was just unbelievable. Lehigh looked lost out there. They had no idea what was going on. I don't know how many turnovers they had, but it was more than they scored points. 30 turnovers.
30 turnovers to 3 assists.
Yeah. So they had more turnovers than points, which is the first time Duke's pulled that off this year. So I mean, Lehigh's a good team, but ultimately, it's a big gap, and Duke, played up to its standard, and I think that's really what it came down to at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agreed. The defense was phenomenal, as it is normally in Kara Lawson's tenure. One thing that one of our writers, Elle Chavis, wrote about in her sidebar was how, despite how all of it, was pretty good on the defensive end, and offensively they found their rhythm later, but for the first couple of quarters there was a lot of turnover issues for Duke, and they really didn't find their rhythm until late in that game. And so it was kind of a warning saying, if you keep up these turnovers, that could come back to bite this team down the road in the NCAA tournament. Obviously, turnovers on offense have kind of been an issue for this team as well throughout the past couple of years, but it seemed like they figured it out towards the end. But a little bit sloppy to start the game, but maybe just some NCAA tournament nerves there.
Yeah.
All right, so 2 days later, they came back and defeated Oregon 59-53. A lot closer of a game, a lot different feel there. There was a bunch of different storylines. Obviously, Toby Fournier was out with an illness during that game, so Duke had to rely on its other key players to step up, which they did in the second half. So talk about that Oregon game a little bit and how Duke came away with that win.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of a rocky first half. I would say, frankly, quarters 1, 2, and 4 were not ideal for Duke by any standard. Ashlyn Jackson notably had 0 points in the first half and then dropped 20, including an 11-0 individual run in the second half, which was pretty remarkable to start that third quarter specifically. I thought they just came out slow. Duke did. I thought they had a hard time handling Deja Kelly. She was getting a lot of ball screens, and they were not attacking those well at all. I thought they really had a hard time containing Filipina Che, who's this, in case you weren't watching the broadcast, a 6'8" center. And so I thought in the second half, they sort of figured out a little bit better how to deal with Che. She also got in a little bit of foul trouble, and they did a better job, forcing Deja Kelly, a former UNC player who was really having a hot night, especially in the first half, did a much better job containing her. So, I mean, I think Ashlyn Jackson's the hero of this game. Well, with that run, she really sort of kicked off that momentum in the third quarter to get Duke back into the game if they were trailing. I also thought Delaney Thomas had a good game down low. You don't really have a ton of big support. Jordan Wood was not a serviceable center. She was not good on at either end of the floor in that way, I would say. But Delaney really came in only 3 for 9 from the field, which I guess is partly because you're being guarded by a 6'8" center, but also 6 for 7 from the line, 6 rebounds. She played hard. She played well on the boards. I think that's really between Delaney Thomas and Ashlyn Jackson. That's what got Duke through this tough round. I think Oregon played better than its seeding would indicate in this game.
Yeah, I was going to mention Delaney because I thought she made some clutch free throws in that fourth quarter. I know you asked Coach Lawson about the ball screen difference there and kind of attacking it and not letting her get to her mid-range, her being Deja Kelly. What specifically changed, do you think, for the second half for Duke, and why do you think the Blue Devils were successful against Deja? And do you think they maybe just kind of wore her out and wore them out, or was there, some schematic differences you saw?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that Deja Kelly just had a hot hand in the first 2 quarters. She just was making everything she shot. But even, towards the end of the game, you could see she was getting back to that. Towards the end of the third quarter and in the first half of the fourth quarter, she was shooting really well again. I thought in the first half, Duke did a really bad job of hedging around those screens when she got screens, and so she would just have like 3-4 feet of empty space every time she came off a screen, and she would just pull it and it would go in.
Yeah.
And they talk about mid range not being a great shot, but I mean they were going in. So what can you do? And then in the second half, they did a much better job sort of making those shots difficult, making it harder for her to get around those screens and really have any open space. So I think that was the big. It wasn't really a schematic difference. They were just doing their jobs better. When I asked Coach Lawson about it, and I think that's what it came down to. And then at the end of the game, I mean, it was just desperation. Deja Kelly is without Peyton Scott, who went down with a knee injury towards the end of the game.
Yeah.
Deja Kelly is probably their best scorer, and she just couldn't get it done. They forced her to take some really tough shots, and that's what ultimately did Oregon in.
Yeah, that injury to Peyton Scott was sad. Hope she's okay and recover well for the future. So yeah. I mean, it was a couple clutch plays at the end for Duke to hold off Oregon. Got a little squirrely there with a couple of almost turnovers in the trying to go against the full court press that Oregon had, but Duke came in with a win. And now we know that Duke will be playing North Carolina in Birmingham. You're going to be there. That's going to be super fun. Obviously, Duke North Carolina games are one of a kind, especially on this women's side. Briefly, just what do you think Duke has to do to defeat North Carolina and, possibly play South Carolina in the Elite Eight, or maybe Maryland as well?
I mean, frankly, like these two teams are just like play ridiculous defense and they score in transition all the time, and neither team really has a good half court offense. Like, or both teams struggle with consistency issues in the half court offense, I will say. So I think this one's gonna come down to just protecting the ball, just like you can't have double-digit turnovers. You really can't have more than 10, 12 turnovers in this game and expect to win either team, because there's just going to be a ton of hard-nosed defense and a ton of getting out and running in transition. So I think it'll be low scoring. I mean, it's just going to be – it's not going to be if you like high-scoring games, this is not going to be an enjoyable watch for anyone. I'm frankly sort of dreading covering it a little bit for that reason. Like – we're going to see like 50-40 type storylines. So
Classic. And this time North Carolina is going to have Alyssa Utsby and Renaya Kelly back, so there's going to be two factors that Duke will have to contain. All right, yes, that'll be at 2:30 Friday night, so definitely check that. Or Friday afternoon, I guess. So check that out one. That should be fun. Let's switch gears a little bit to the men's side. Mentioned the two games that the Blue Devils played to start off, defeating Mount St. Mary's and Baylor to advance to the Sweet 16. Start with Mount St. Mary's. Similar situation to the Lehigh game, a 93-49 defeat, kind of a blowout across the board. Caleb, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Abby. What were some of your just takeaways from that game itself?
Yeah. First thing, like game notwithstanding, the atmosphere in Raleigh was incredible. Obviously, when you're a one seed, you get the advantage of playing close to home, and the Duke fans. It was probably like 80% Duke fans in that place. And so obviously a big advantage for Duke there, and a fun time. And then in terms of the game, I think the biggest thing that stood out against Mount St. Mary's was the turnovers. Or the lack thereof for Duke. They didn't have a turnover until like 2 minutes left in the game, which is pretty insane. But we've seen, I mean, Duke's offense has slowly progressed throughout the season. I think, they're playing the best they have all season right now. And I mean, 22 assists to 2 turnovers is pretty dang good. Um, Cooper Flag had 5 assists. Tyrese Proctor had 5 assists. And so I just thought they moved the ball really well. When they got open shots, they knocked them down. They shot pretty good percentage as well. And yeah, they just kind of took advantage of a lesser opponent.
Yeah, I would say I think the big narrative coming into this game was that Cooper Flag was going to be back for Duke after missing the last couple games of the ACC tournament with his ankle injury. But he actually came out against Mount St. Mary's with a pretty muted performance. I mean, he had 14 points. He only played 22 minutes. And I think Tyrese Proctor was actually the one who kind of stole the show. He hit 6 3-pointers, just like he did against Louisville, and finished with 19 points. So I think that was really cool to see him step up. Then you also had great performances from Caleb Foster, Patrick Gongba. So I think it was pretty spread out across the board. Everyone was really contributing. It was a team effort.
Yeah, definitely. You like to see that the depth for Duke was on full display. Got Spencer Hubbard could get a bucket. Neil Begovic hit a 3. Pretty much everything.
Darren Harris had 7 points.
Oh, he had that dunk
and
too,
4
right?
rebounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was fun. All right, yeah. So that was good. I hope you guys enjoyed Raleigh. That seems like a super fun opportunity. And then moved on to Baylor for the second round to play the number 9 seed. Obviously the big storyline here. Former Duke guard Jeremy Roach was on Baylor. It made me sad to see Jeremy Roach had the towel over his head and draped over. It was a sad moment, but another phenomenal game from Duke. A 23-point defeat for the Blue Devils. Abby, I'll start with you this time. I know you wrote a really cool piece about Tyrese Proctor. You can talk about that too, and just some of your overall takeaways from that win.
Yeah, I was going to say it was a great basketball game to watch, but what stood out to me was seeing the relationships that the Duke team has kind of built. I mean, even some of these people, like Proctor playing against Jeremy Roach, obviously, they were teammates last year. John Shire said that when he saw Roach in the handshake line, he just told him that he loved him, and he was glad that they were there playing together. Wished him the best of luck with his season, however it may end. So that was really cool to see. And then John Shire, obviously, he got pretty emotional in the press conference afterwards. Tyrese Proctor joined him as the first Blue Devil since 2010 to make 5 or more 3-pointers in back-to-back NCAA tournament games. So I think that was a cool moment between them, and it really just showed how far I think they've both come over 3 years. John Shire taking this team from number 5 seed in the tournament to number 4 seed, and now they're number 1 seed. They're looking like a really strong title contender. And Tyrese Proctor had a great freshman season, struggled a little bit his sophomore year, and now, he's back. He had 25 points, 7 3-pointers. He had just an incredible game. So that kind of transition over time, I think if you place this game in context, it was really cool to see.
For sure. If you haven't gotten a chance to both read the article and watch that video from Shire, it was really powerful to see what Proctor means to him, and those stats are pretty cool for him to join his fellow coach's company. Yeah, that's awesome. Caleb, what are some of your takeaways?
Yeah, to the Proctor thing and the Scott Drew press conference, he said, "Yeah, I think Steph Curry transferred in to Duke this week," and it would look like that. I mean, Proctor, he was hitting step back threes. I mean, contested threes didn't matter. And he's really developed his 3-point shot here. I think the status, I did the math. He's like 19 for whatever, 29 or something his last 3 games. It's been unbelievable. And so. But yeah, I think in terms of Baylor, they all year have struggled with depth and size. Those things were obvious again against Duke. But I was very impressed with Baylor. They killed the offensive glass in the first half. Norchad Amir dominated down there. A lot of extra possessions for the Bears. But second half, Duke kind of locked in there. Amir got in foul trouble. Drew sat him down with 4 for a while. And so Duke was able to kind of control the glass and run away with the game. Patrick Goma and Kamal Malawach both played pretty well down low. And then the guards, they did a pretty good job cutting off VJ Edgecombe, who's probably the best prospect and best player for Baylor. And so Duke ended up running away and extending the lead.
How about that free throw shooting from Patrick? And come on,
No,
man.
I mean, the thing about that team is, I mean, they were 19 of 23 from the free throw line. And like the bigs really can shoot the free throw well. There hasn't been a lot of games this year where they've kind of killed Duke in that way. And so obviously that bodes well. Down the stretch, teams are going to try to foul them if it comes to that. And so yeah, it's really really impressive.
Yeah, similar to the Mount St. Mary's game, I think you were able to see a little bit of the depth on display. Caleb Foster had a few tough buckets, and Mason Gillis hit a couple threes. I mean, if Mason Gillis can hit threes consistently down the stretch and get back into his Purdue NCAA tournament self, I mean, sky's the limit for this team, really. I also was impressed by the fact that, early on it did seem like, kind of like you mentioned, they were getting a lot of offensive rebounds, they as in Baylor. We're attacking the glass and kind of handing Duke, out toughing Duke inside. And, that was almost similar a little bit to the first half against Louisville in the ACC championship game. And then obviously that video went out with Shark telling everyone, oh, you guys are too soft. And they completely flipped the script in the second half. And something similar happened in the second half against Baylor as well. And I was just also, you miss Cooper Flagg for a week. You kind of forget about just how excellent this guy is. And he made some crazy plays on offense. And you're just like, okay, he's back now. So that was cool to see, and a great all-around performance for the Blue Devils. Any other takeaways from you guys?
No, I think one thing, and we might talk about this in terms of Baylor, or in terms of Arizona coming up, but Isaiah Evans is 0 for 7 from 3 in these first 2 tournament games. Obviously, it hasn't hurt Duke too much now. They've been shooting unreal from the field in both. But, as you get deeper in this tournament, you like to get him going. He only played 7 minutes. He was 0 for 2 against Baylor, and so you just like to see him, and we know he can do it, and, you just got to see one go in, and so it'd be good for them to get him back in rhythm in Newark.
0 for 7 means he's due.
Yeah.
There you go. He's not going to be afraid to shoot. I'll tell you that.
Nope.
Awesome. Good stuff. Well, Martin, Abby, thank you guys so much for joining us here, and great analysis and good stuff as always.
Awesome.
We will be back with Andrew Long, one of our other beats who covered in Raleigh, to talk about some more takeaways from the men's game and then preview the Sweet 16 and Elite 8. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the Camera Chronicles. Like I mentioned, we're joined by Andrew Long, former Chronicle sports editor, one of our men's basketball beats. Andrew, welcome back to the Camera Chronicles.
Good to be back. Thank y'all.
It's been a minute. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about the look ahead for Duke. I mentioned that Duke is going to be playing Arizona in the Sweet 16 Thursday at 9:39 p.m. over in Newark, New Jersey. Late tip for everyone. But Andrew, I know you covered the first matchup between the two squads and also covered the first 2 rounds in Raleigh. So I'll start with the first matchup that Duke played Arizona. Obviously, Duke won that in a pretty defensive battle, 69-55. The Blue Devils were able to come away with that win. What were some of your takeaways from that first game, and what do you think Duke can learn from that and use in this next matchup?
Yeah, I mean, I think defensive battle is definitely the right way to put it. The 2 things that stood out most, I mean, that first half down in Tucson was a bit of a cage match. Like, neither team could really find space for the other one for a while. But eventually Duke did start to pull away, and I think the main reason for that was its size. Arizona has started to figure that out sort of recently. They've kind of changed the rotation. They've got Visar and Awaka in more recently, and that's certainly helped. But I think, we've talked all season about how just big Duke is, and especially how big Duke's guard room is.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm shy, or I'm really liking the way that looks for the Sweet 16, I don't know how many of the people listening to this watched Oregon, Arizona. As someone from that part of the country, it's a little bit of Pac-12 after dark action. But I mean, I think we kind of saw those same things come to fruition, right? Like they weren't playing their biggest lineup down the stretch when that really mattered. Oregon was able to take advantage of that, and ultimately the reason that Arizona won was because Caleb Love had 30.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think the real it's going to be a similar game plan for Duke from the first one against Arizona. I think here, with the added caveat that the rotation is 1 man deeper now, because we've seen Pat Ngangba and Isaiah Evans join it, and neither of them played in that game. And with Malik Brown hurt, that's just kind of how the math works out. So I don't hate the way this looks for Duke at all. I think I would be more worried against Oregon.
Yeah. You alluded to it there, but I'll mention it real quick just so the listeners can know. So, Krivas, the Arizona center, is not going to be playing. He's done for the year. But the couple new players that they've been playing a little bit more, Toby Awaka, like you mentioned, is one of the better rebounders on the team and in the country even. I mean, he's averaging 8 rebounds a game, 8.2 points a game, and he's a force down low. The second one is Anthony Del Orso. He started against Oregon and made some clutch free throws there at the end. He's the Campbell transfer that is in his first year with the Wildcats. He's just, he's a big player, but he's a sniper. He can shoot the lights out of the ball, so he's someone to watch who can space the floor, especially when you have Caleb Love and Jalen Bradley driving and stuff like that. So those are just a couple players to watch and why you might see a little bit of a different lineup for Arizona.
Can I add something on that, actually?
Yeah, of course.
I think, again, going back to the Caleb Love thing, he shot amazing against Oregon. He went 3 of 13 against Duke the first time. Jaden Bradley Is it? It's Jaden, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
Jaden.
Okay.
8 for 16.
Yeah, he went 8 for 16, so he did good. But like, when you have Caleb Love going 3 for 13, you don't really have any sort of chance of winning a game against a team like Duke that will limit your opportunities so much and force you to shoot from deep well to beat it. So I think keep an eye on that. I know Duke fans are very familiar with what can happen if Caleb Love gets hot. But that's kind of the story of Caleb Love's career is you don't know whether he's going to.
Yeah.
So that's going to be something to watch.
Caleb, what are some of your keys for Duke?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at the box score from the last game, the first time they played, Duke was plus 13 on the glass. I do think that'll probably happen again. They did a really good job against Owaka last time. He's like, top 10 rebounder in the country, and he only had 3 rebounds in the last game against Duke and only played 12 minutes. It's not a great matchup for him. He's kind of an undersized big. Um, the main thing that sticks out to me at this box score is Duke was 15 assists and 14 turnovers in the first game. I'd be shocked if that happens again. With the way they're sharing the ball right now. And so if they protect the ball, obviously they're playing at Arizona as well, so hostile environment and early in the season. But I do think I'd be shocked if they had that many turnovers and not that many assists. Um, but yeah, I think like Andrew said, the rotation is much different now. I mean, Caleb Foster started in the game against Arizona the first time. Sion James is obviously filling that role now, and it's like 25-1 since he got in the starting lineup. I do think Isaiah Evans and Pat Gongba are gonna, Isaiah Evans. We talked about earlier. He hasn't seen a lot of shots fall early here, but I think, obviously he's a flamethrower. So whenever he sees one go in, he'll have a chance to impact the game in a big way. And then Gongba's been great, filling in for Malik Brown. So I do think Duke has a good rotation that can, match up with Arizona well. You hope Proctor and Knipple don't combine for 7 for 22 like they did the first time against Arizona. I do think, how they've been playing. The numbers should tick up a bit, and yeah, I do think the matchup's pretty good. As long as they contain Caleb Love.
Yeah, I think my key really is Common Malawatch for 2 reasons. One reason is obviously on the rebounding end of things. There was a couple times against Baylor and throughout the season where he's had the ball and it's kind of just slipped out of his hand or he's tipped it and he's not been able to secure the rebound, and that's going to be really important because he's going to be playing against smaller players who are going to be jumping up and trying to mess with him, but he's going to have to get the ball up high, hold it strong, and get those rebounds. Second reason is Arizona on offense runs a lot of dribble handoffs to try to get Caleb Love in a mismatch with a center. So usually they'll have the Henry Vesar or a Walker or someone dribble to Caleb and hand it off and have him come off that screen and attack the basket. And so Common Malich has been able to switch pretty well throughout the season, but if he can contain Caleb Love on some of those switches, it'll be interesting to see how Duke defends it. But if he is on Love or one of those fast Arizona guards, it'll be important.
I will say to that point, I think I watched back some clips of the Baylor game, and I mean Malawatch has been pretty well switching all year, but I think Gongba also has really improved there. There's a couple of clips where they try to do that with VJ Edgecombe, who's pretty explosive and going to be a top 10 pick in the NBA draft, and Gongba just cut him off right in his tracks and didn't let him get to the basket. So I do think Duke's team defense has definitely improved since that 5th game of the season, whatever it was. So I do think the bigs are definitely crucial, but I think they've definitely improved with the footwork and team defense there.
Yeah, there's just not like a weak spot in Duke's defense kind of at all. Like
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
your smallest defender and your starting rotation is 6'6".
Yep.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean they're bigger at every position than Arizona, so which obviously is a benefit. Awaka had 14 rebounds against Oregon. I guess we'll see what he does against Duke, but he's gonna be matched up on Cooper Flag, so it's pretty tough matchup there.
Yeah, and now looking kind of a little bit ahead, obviously you don't want to forecast anything, but BYU and Alabama are the 2 teams that Duke would play the winner of if Duke was able to win. Interesting, similar teams in the fact that they're both very offensively oriented, can shoot the lights out of the ball. Both have struggled with defense at times, but I think it creates an interesting matchup for Duke and one that I think probably favors Duke either way if it occurs. If Duke was to play either of those teams, what do you guys think, are the keys for Duke to move to the Final Four, and how do you see a possible Duke matchup against Bama or BYU?
Yeah, I do think you sugarcoat it a little bit. I think that game was going to be the first to 110 when they play each other. Those 2 teams do not play a lot of defense. But yeah, I think Alabama, obviously will be the favorite in that one. Assuming they win, they lead the country in tempo. They play at an absolute breakneck pace. I do think Duke has been pretty good this season about controlling the tempo of the game and making teams come to their pace. I do think they can do that against Alabama as well. We kind of saw. I mean, we've seen it throughout the season. Alabama's got frustrated when the teams try to slow them down and struggle a little bit on that front. So I do think Duke matches up pretty well there. Obviously, Mark Sears is kind of like Kilville we talked about. He can get hot at any moment and torch Duke, but I do think he's 6'1", and so I think Proctor or Sion James, whoever, will match up pretty well there. And then BYU, they've been hot from three in the first two games. Richie Saunders has been unbelievable, but yeah, same kind of thing. I think the defense might just not be good enough to keep up with Duke.
Yeah, I mean, I think agree with all that. The only thing I would add for Alabama is like the Nate Oates school of basketball means they will take a bunch of threes and really try to drive and not do a whole lot in the middle. And Duke's size down low will make driving hard, and its perimeter defense will make shooting hard. So that doesn't mean that it can't have offensive success. We've seen a lot of different teams give Alabama a run. But I think that's the part of that matchup that gives me the most confidence. I think the tempo is one thing, but it's also just the way that Alabama plays basketball. It's very analytical. The whole Nate Oates school. I don't really got to say more than that.
Yep.
And then BYU. Yeah, shoot the ball as well as anyone. I'd honestly be surprised if a team won with only 110. But I think it was in the Big 12 tourney, I think, that BYU played Houston.
Yep.
And that shooting only got them so far when they were confronted with an elite defense.
Yeah.
Duke's offense has really come to life in this last stretch of the season. We've seen that. But ultimately, it feels like the defining characteristic for all of these potential three matchups on the way to San Antonio is going to be Duke's defense.
Mm-hmm.
And it just so happens that you also have like a healthy Cooper Flag and Tyrese Proctor playing his best basketball as a Blue Devil. So I don't know. I think I sort of thought when this whole bracket was announced that this was a pretty decent draw for Duke, and I think the way it's shaking out is showing that. But obviously, it's March. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the Houston game, they lost by 20 on a neutral floor to Houston. Obviously, Houston's defense is suffocating in a similar vein to Duke. And then BYU, looking at their stats, they're 248th in 3-point percentage allowed. With how Tyrese Proctor's been shooting, that does not fare well for the Cougars. And so I do think it'd be interesting. Obviously, both teams have a lot of talent and a good size too. So I think it'll be interesting to see how Duke matches up with either one of them, assuming they beat the Wildcats on Thursday.
For sure. Yeah, both of those games should be fun Sweet 16 games, and there's obviously a lot more Thursday and Friday across the tournament. It's been kind of an interesting tournament, pretty chalky to start off, I would say. And most of the 1 seeds and 2 seeds are all but a couple 2 seeds are moving forward. But do you guys have any national takeaways that you're thinking? Are all of your Final Fours still intact?
By the grace of Derek Queen,
Yeah.
my Final Four is still intact. Yes.
My Final Four is intact and looking
well.
quite good. I've got Michigan State, Duke, Florida, and Tennessee.
I am at Maryland, Auburn, Houston, and Duke, so all still in. I do think. Like just a couple things. I guess Houston really impressed me. They obviously had to play a pretty tough 8-9 matchup. And it got close there at the end, but I mean Houston, they just cut your water off. They're so good on defense this year. And the offense I think is pretty well improved from last season. So definitely a dangerous team there. The Florida UConn game, got to catch the end of that on press row at the Lenovo Center. Super interesting game to watch. Florida definitely got punched in the mouth a little bit and let UConn kind of take it to them, but Walter Clayton is just so good and closed that game out for him. Thought UConn had a good amount of looks at the end of the game. They just didn't fall. And so I do think Florida's look a little vulnerable, but so was Maryland, who's their Sweet 16 matchup. It took a miracle for them to beat Colorado State. So I do think it'll be interesting in that region. And Texas Tech has been good too. And then I think Auburn Michigan State will be an interesting one if they get there.
All like the 8-9 matchups, not for Duke, were just brutal draws.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Auburn ended up handling Creighton pretty well, but that's not easy. Like, I don't care if UConn has a bad season; it's still Dan Hurley in the tournament.
Yeah.
Like that's brutal. And then you have Gonzaga, who's like
top 10 team in the country.
Yeah, I mean, I thought they were an Elite 8 team. Like I thought. Yeah.
So it's definitely been very chalk. Some people say it's the the portal or NIL or whatever. I think it just happens sometimes. I think the top of the country this year is really, really good. Obviously it's one of the best groups of 1 seeds we've ever seen. And so it's I guess been boring to some, but the Sweet 16, Elite 8, and going forward should be really entertaining games.
Yeah, the matchups are going to be great. I have Auburn, Texas Tech, Houston, and Duke. So
Yep.
that West region is going to be interesting. I think Texas Tech got a little bit of an easier draw, easier path going through Drake, who's a quality team, but now you got to play Arkansas, which I think, while they're playing well, is probably a better matchup for Texas Tech than St. John's would have been. So that's going to be interesting. I'm also watching that South region because Auburn's had a little bit of an interesting tournament because even against Alabama State, they didn't look fantastic throughout. Been inconsistent. We're losing against Creighton for a good portion. Todd Pettiford really stepped up in that in that second half. So I don't know. I mean, Auburn is obviously as dangerous of a team as anyone in the country, but they're going to have to continue to play more consistent if they want to make it to the Final Four. But yeah, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, another fantastic weekend of basketball.
We're back.
Extend that into Monday for the women's ones. Like I mentioned earlier, the women's team is going to be playing at 2:30 on Friday, and the men's team is going to be playing at 9:39 Thursday night. So check all of that out. Thank you guys for doing this, Andrew. Thank you for coming on, man.
Thank you.
Check out all of our coverage at DukeChronicle.com. We'll have we still have our print editions across shelves across campus, on shelves across campus, and for the men's and women's teams as well. Yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoy this weekend of basketball. For Caleb Dudley, I'm Ranjan Jindal. This has been the Cameron Chronicles.